You open your fridge, you grab a cold bottle of water, you never think twice about it. But 5,000 years ago, in a land where the sun could push past 50 degrees Celsius, a bottle of clean water didn't exist. There was no fridge, no plastic, no filter, just sand, sun, and a river that flooded once a year and decided whether you lived or starved. And yet, out of that furnace rose one of the greatest civilizations in human history. So how did they do it? How did people survive, build pyramids, raise families, and throw parties in heat that can kill a person in hours? The answer isn't just about food. It's about survival engineering, religion, and economics all at once. And it starts, strangely enough, with a drink you'd never expect: beer. Let's go back, not centuries, but millennia. Around 7,000 years ago, before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, before Egypt was even called Egypt, small farming communities lived along the banks of the Nile. The desert around them was already brutal, but the river was forgiving. Every year it flooded, and every year it left behind a strip of black, fertile soil. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, named after that soil, because that soil was life. On it, they grew two things above all else: emmer wheat and barley. These two grains would go on to define an entire civilization, not just as food, but as currency, medicine, religion, and a matter of life and death in the heat. Here's the problem archaeologists kept running into. The Nile was full of water, but it was also full of bacteria, parasites, and waste. Drinking it raw, especially in extreme heat when the body craves liquid the most, could kill a person just as easily as thirst could. So the Egyptians did something remarkable. They brewed it. Barley and emmer were soaked, mashed, and fermented into a thick, nutritious, low-alcohol beer. The brewing process, involving boiling and fermentation, helped neutralize many of the pathogens in the water. They didn't understand it as germ theory, and they didn't know what bacteria were, but through generations of trial and error, they knew that beer kept people alive when water made them sick. This wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Beer became so essential that it was written into the Egyptian language itself. The hieroglyphic symbols for bread and beer combined simply meant meal. Not breakfast, not lunch, just sustenance itself. Now picture the desert around 2560 BC, with the Great Pyramid of Giza rising block by block under a sun that turned sand into a stovetop. Tens of thousands of workers hauled limestone in temperatures that could reach past 50 degrees Celsius on exposed rock. These weren't slaves, as later myths claimed. Archaeological evidence, including worker cemeteries, healed bone fractures showing medical care and organized housing, points instead to a paid rotating labor force made up of farmers conscripted during the Nile's flood season, when their fields were underwater anyway, working for the state in exchange for rations. And what were those rations? Bread and beer, every single day. Some estimates based on ancient ration texts suggest a worker could receive around 10 loaves of bread and several liters of beer daily, though the exact volumes are still debated by historians because ancient measurement units are difficult to convert. Still, the pattern is undeniable. Bread and beer weren't treats, they were wages, they were fuel. The beer itself was nothing like what we drink today. It was thick, almost soupy, sometimes sweetened with dates, sometimes flavored with herbs, low in alcohol but high in calories and nutrients. Sipped throughout a long shift in brutal heat, it kept the body's fluids and energy up in a way plain river water simply couldn't guarantee. The bread wasn't ordinary either. Made from coarsely ground emmer wheat and baked in tall conical clay molds over open fires, it was dense, hearty, and often gritty with sand and stone dust from the grinding process. Archaeologists studying Egyptian mummies have even found their teeth worn down almost to the roots, a quiet physical record of a lifetime spent chewing gritty bread under a merciless sun. But bread and beer alone don't explain how an entire civilization thrived in the hottest corner of the ancient world. There was more on the table. Onions and garlic appear again and again in tomb paintings and worker ration lists. To the Egyptians, these weren't just flavor, they were believed to carry protective and even medicinal properties. Modern nutritional science suggests they may have offered real benefits too, with compounds that support circulation and help the body cope with physical exertion in extreme heat, though how deliberately the Egyptians understood this remains a matter of debate among historians. Fish came straight from the Nile, salted or dried in the sun to preserve it in a climate with no refrigeration. Dates, sweet and packed with natural sugars and potassium, grew abundantly along the riverbanks, and in brutal heat when the body loses vital salts and minerals through sweat, they functioned almost like a natural sports drink, long before anyone had a word for electrolytes. The wealthy elite feasted differently, with tables full of roasted meat, imported wine, honey-sweetened cakes, and a wide variety of vegetables and fruit. But even for the elite, the underlying strategy was the same as for the common laborer: eat dense calorie-rich food and drink liquids that were safer and more sustaining than raw river water. Now travel forward a few centuries to the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the skilled artisans who carved the tombs of pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. Here, archaeologists found something extraordinary, and not just bones and pottery, but paperwork, written records, complaints, and even strikes. In one of the earliest recorded labor disputes in human history, these tomb workers walked off the job during the reign of Ramses III because their rations, that same lifeline of bread and beer, arrived late. Think about that. In a civilization famous for pyramids and pharaohs, one of its clearest written legacies is a group of workers refusing to build a king's tomb because the beer didn't show up on time. It tells us something powerful. Food and drink in ancient Egypt weren't background details of daily life. They were the currency that held the entire society together. But how did ordinary people actually survive the physical heat itself, day after day, without air conditioning and without shade structures beyond mud brick walls? Egyptian houses were built thick, out of mud brick, which absorbed heat slowly during the day and released it slowly at night, a primitive but effective form of natural insulation. Homes had small, high windows to limit direct sun, and many activities were structured around the sun's rhythm, with work beginning at dawn, pausing during the punishing midday hours, and resuming as the heat broke in the late afternoon. It's a rhythm still followed in parts of Egypt and across the Middle East today. Religion, too, was tangled up with the climate. The sun god Ra wasn't just worshipped from a safe distance. He was the sun itself, the very force that could sustain life along the Nile or destroy it with drought and famine. Egyptian religion didn't ask people to fear the heat. It asked them to understand it, to structure their entire cosmology around its daily journey across the sky. As Egypt moved into its New Kingdom era, trade networks expanded and Egyptians began importing exotic fruits, oils, and spices from the Levant and beyond. Diets diversified, especially among the elite. But the core survival formula, established thousands of years earlier by simple farmers on the Nile's black soil, never disappeared. Bread, beer, onions, dates, fish, a diet built quite literally for a furnace of a country. Here's what modern science eventually confirmed thousands of years later. In extreme heat, the human body doesn't just need water. It needs salt, sugar, and calories to keep functioning. Plain water alone, in enough quantity, can even dilute the body's essential sodium levels, a dangerous condition. What the body actually needs is closer to what the ancient Egyptians were already drinking: fluid, carbohydrates, and minerals, combined. They didn't have the language of electrolytes or hydration science. But through thousands of years of trial, error, and hard-won survival, they built a diet that worked, shaped not by laboratories, but by the merciless, brilliant, unforgiving sun above the Nile. So the next time you reach for a cold bottle of water without a second thought, remember this. Somewhere beneath the sand of modern Egypt, the bones of pyramid builders still carry the evidence of a different solution, a thick, sweet, slightly alcoholic answer to one of humanity's oldest problems. They didn't just survive the heat. They built an empire out of it.